Good evening. I'll call the meeting to order, the September 16th, 2024 meeting of the Planning Advisory Council. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We also acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years. We honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of Mi'kmaq and African descent who came before us to this land. I will ask everyone on the committee to review the agenda, please, and advise if there is anything to be added. And aside from that, if anyone would like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, Councillor Graham moved and Deputy Mayor Hinton seconded. All those in favor of the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any contrary-minded? Thank you. So the next thing on the agenda is to approve the minutes of our last meeting from August 26th.
So moved.
Thanks, Councillor Graham. Any seconder for that motion? Ms. Langell, thank you. Any discussion about the minutes, errors, or omissions? Or if someone's ready to call for the question.
Question.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes as circulated, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand. Thank you. Any negative? Sorry, what's like my words are getting stuck in my mouth. Voting no on that? No, thank you. Okay. So we are now going to move to items 3 and 4 on the agenda. Planner Fox will be reviewing these applications together as we know that they are part of the same project. You'll recall they are being treated as two separate applications based on the fact that they do have some different land types in the application, so they have different treatment under the legislation. So I will move it over to Planner Fox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is an application for 179 Queen Street. It's the first one I'll be talking about. This is a development agreement application. It is for redevelopment of the existing Stamfield's employee parking lot at 179 Queen Street. This application is is part of the proposed redevelopment of the current Stamfield's textile mill buildings and property. But it's being treated separately as a separate file. So this application was made in June 20th, 2024, and as I mentioned, it is part of the larger proposal to redevelop the site. It includes a new mixed-use building containing 192 dwelling units and about 4,000 square feet of commercial space, and there's also 259 parking stalls on 2 levels of parking. Just a few moments, I'm just going to spend a few moments discussing some of the process, where we are in the process and what's taken place so far. So right now we are at, this is step 3, so this is where we are in the 5-step process for the development agreement approval process. And you may recall we went through step 1. Step 1 consisted of the first meeting held back in June 24th, 2024. At that time, the committee did express some concern about the building's scale relative to other properties on Queen and its proximity to Queen Street. There was also concern about traffic and shadows. And it was also requested the applicant hold public information meetings prior to the next meeting of PAC. And then following step 1, the application description was posted on the town's website, and we also did notice of the meeting on the next meeting on the website as well. Then we went to step 2. Just prior to step 2, there was, in response to concerns expressed at the June 24th Planning Committee meeting, the applicant shifted the building further back from Queen Street to match the setbacks and neighboring structures. Also at the request of the committee, there were 2 public information sessions held on July 18th and 24th at the library. And also at the request of the committee, the applicant submitted a shadow study in response to concern about shadowing of neighboring properties. And then the second Planning Advisory Committee meeting there in step 2 was held on August 26th. And at that time, the committee requested information about tree retention and plantings, and also there was a request for a traffic impact statement. And then just following step 2, we asked the applicant to post the development notice sign on the property. That was done on August 27th, 2024, and we did a mail out to all properties in the area on August 28th, 2024. So now we are at step 3. And just prior to this meeting, the applicant has submitted a traffic impact study, and then there's also some details around the tree planting and retention plan, and there was a public survey circulated. The public survey results, were circulated to the planning committee as well. And at this point, staff will present its report and recommendation, and then the applicant will may make a presentation, and then the committee is expected at this meeting today to make its recommendation to council. And I think what I'll do is I'll probably present both of these, and then maybe you can hold a recommendation on both files till after, perhaps. So the subject lands are outlined in the dark yellow. So that's the 179 Queen Street's property, which is the parking lot on Queen Street, and then the Stanfield site proper is the one outlined in the dashed yellow line. Areas and mixed-use area. It's dominated by the Stanfield's factory, and there are other uses in the area, though. Along Queen, Bayview, and Logan, there's a bit of a mixture of residential uses, and there's also some single detached and mixed-use multi-unit buildings, and then there's some commercial uses along Queen to the east, as well as some large institutional uses on Lawrence Street to the west, and there's some significant large undeveloped lands in the area as well, and some agricultural land. Subject lands, in terms of the town's planning documents, the lands are within what we call the regional service and urban corridor policy areas. There is, however, you can see the dark line there on the plan showing the subject lands. There's a very small sliver of the property that happens to be within the regional service. But for the purposes of this review, this policy review, we're only focusing on the urban corridor policies because that's where the building proper is situated and the most applicable to this site. So in terms of the zoning, the property is zoned regional service, and there's also, again, that little sliver of, a zoned urban corridor with a little sliver of regional service, or RS. There's also a 1 in 100 and 1 in 20 floodplain overlay on that sliver at the very northern edge of the property as well. But those will not impact the development itself. In terms of the development proposal, it is a U-shaped building with a 6-story and 11-story section on top of a common base that's between 4 and 5 floors. There's frontage on both Queen, and there's a new internal street through the Stanfield site that would have frontage as well, although this is, I believe, to be treated as a private street, but it would function as a public street in the sense of conveyance of people and traffic, and it would serve as frontage for this development as well. There's pedestrian access to the site both from the new internal street and from Queen Street. And there's also a public walkway that cuts through and courtyard through the site, which provides a direct pedestrian connection from Queen in through the development onto the new Stanfield site to the north. And this is an important open space connection between the downtown commercial area, existing commercial development, and the Stanfield site proper. So in terms of some floor plans, this is mixed-use development consisting of 192 dwelling units, and again, just over 4,000 square feet of commercial space. The ground floor plan is shown on the right-hand side, and you can see that there's some apartment layouts around the apartments laid out around the public courtyard in the middle, and then on the left-hand side you can see the parking commercial level, which would be the lower level below grade on the Queen Street side, but would be at grade on the new internal street on the Stanfield site, and that's where they're proposing to have the retail space and also have the driveway access to the underground parking garage. So we'll talk about that again in a few minutes as well. This is the aerial perspective view of the overall development looking northwest. So again, it shows the proposed U-shaped building with the low podium structure that's 4 to 5 stories. It shows 4 on here. And then there's also the 6-story section closest to Queen Street, and then the 11-story section, which is at the back of the property, closer to the existing Stanfield site. This is a street view of the proposed development looking east from Queen Street. And you can see it's showing here, and I'll talk a bit about this more later, the 4-story street wall here and a 5-floor street wall here, which steps up. These are aligned with existing setbacks on the street, and then the upper floors step back. And I think it's a little under 15 feet, around 10 feet, I believe, to The architect can confirm that, but there was a shadow study done as well. This would probably be more useful maybe if we had a existing and proposed, and maybe you have that. Okay, so I won't spend too much time talking about that. In terms of development proposal, again, we asked for, and this is the tree planting schedule that had been attached, which shows some existing trees and that have been retained, some that have been removed, and a bunch of new trees. So for the Queen Street site, which is just this area here, the plan shows removal of 3 trees. There's a retention of 4 mature trees on site, and then there's a planting of 15 new trees just on the Queen Street site. There's many more on the other, and I'll talk about that when I discuss that application. In terms of policy analysis, I'm going to try and glaze over some of this stuff, but because it gets a little dry. But enabling policies are policy UC 49 and RS 36. So these are the policies that allow council to consider this application by development agreement. And the analysis will focus on primarily the urban corridor policies, because again, the regional service area is just that small sliver to the very north of the property. Is kind of immaterial to this development, where most of the impact is associated with the urban corridor policy area and neighboring properties in the urban corridor zone. In terms of summary of some key issues, so planning staff have reviewed the proposed documents based on the applicable policies found in the town's documents. Some of the potential issues included the height of the building, conformance with urban design standards, land use compatibility. There's also the need for a stormwater management plan and the need for a traffic impact statement. Those were all identified. And I should clarify too, stormwater management plan is something we're asking for. It is a paved parking lot now, so stormwater management can really only be improved, and I think that's being included as part of this proposal. Policy review continued here. So the proposal also aligns with many of the town's planning policies, including increased residential densities downtown, new dwelling units on existing infrastructure, so that's intensification versus sprawl, walkable neighborhoods, appropriate land use mix, and there's also a contribution to the town's pedestrian open space network, which is hugely important as part of this proposal and a real benefit for the town. The proposed slides provide an overview of these key issues, and the following slides, provide an overview of these key issues and policy considerations. Again, there's the height issue of the 11-story section. That's primarily the biggest issue I think we're dealing with on the Queen Street site. So there are 2 sections that are 6 and 11 stories high. The 11-story section is not expected to create any significant compatibility issues because of its location on the property. So it's situated on the northern end of the property, and it's also pushed away from the rear yards of properties on Logan by about 20. There's a 20-meter buffer essentially between them, 65 feet or so, which is a wide landscaped area which has that walkway in it. The closest properties on Logan Street are converted dwellings with intensive residential uses, so there's not really anticipated to be any compatibility issues here. And overall, staff believe the proposal will have a positive impact on the community. The council should not apply the urban corridor zone height limits to this development. And then in terms of impact on the streetscape, urban design standards, the height of the 6-story building is where it comes into play here, where you talk about how the development conforms with the urban design standards the town has and the impact on the walkability of the pedestrian friendliness of the streetscape. So staff are concerned about the scale of the proposed building in relation to the neighboring 1.5 to 2.5-story structures on Queen. And while the front yard setback was appropriately moved back and matches the front yard setbacks of neighboring properties on Queen, the massing and scale of the 4 to 5-story facade does not complement neighboring structures. And there's an issue with significantly varying the street wall from the typical height of massing of existing buildings on the street. So this is a pretty subjective requirement, but it does have an impact on the scale or the way pedestrians perceive scale of their surroundings and their ability to feel comfortable on the street, so in terms of being pedestrian friendly. In terms of land use compatibility, while the proposed residential development is more intensive than the surrounding neighborhood, it is noted that the intensity of the use is largely internalized to the development and oriented to the proposed street to the north of the development, or the proposed private street, should say. The proposed 15-meter to 20-meter wide walkway and public courtyard will help create a visual buffer transition between the larger buildings and the less intensive residential uses on Logan. In terms of the open space pedestrian network, again, I'm going to touch on this because it's really important for this development and it's what its benefits to the town and how it meets a lot of the town's policies for new development. So the proposal does include a public walkway open space area that provides a pedestrian connection through the development that links the downtown to the proposed riverfront trail. And also it could be included, that riverfront trail that is included in the larger Stanfields proposal. The application also represents an important opportunity for the town to develop a key link in its public transit infrastructure, or active transportation infrastructure and open space network. It's going to provide a potential linkage between downtown Truro to Riverfront Park, and then could even link to things like Dalhousie, Bible Hill, the Fundy Discovery Site via potential trail along the dike on the south side of the Salmon River. So staff anticipate that this will encourage increased pedestrian traffic on downtown streets, particularly Dalhousie students, thereby increasing the customer base for local businesses. So this is seen to be an important element of the design that actually meets many of the town's policies. Residential intensification, sustainable growth. This is just really about putting 192 dwelling units on an underutilized parking lot. And you're putting these residential units on existing infrastructure, so you're accommodating new population growth in a sustainable way that doesn't require people to rely on automobiles, because most amenities in the downtown are within easy walking distance. And so the reliance on vehicles for a lot of daily trips would be limited. In terms of review by other departments, on September 5th, we sent this out to a number of different agencies, departments, so the towns and town employees, town's urban forestry coordinator, the school board, the Chignecto Central Regional Center for Education, the fire inspector, building inspector, town engineer's office, traffic authority, director of Parks, Recreation and Culture, and also the police chief. They were all forwarded copies or details of the application, and they were asked to provide any comments or concerns. And at this time, we had received comments from police, fire, Parks and Rec, building inspector, and the town engineer, traffic authority. I also did get some feedback from the urban forestry coordinator, preliminary, but it was positive. So feedback has been positive, and there were no significant concerns identified. And the town engineer, traffic authority has requested that the applicant provide a traffic impact statement and a stormwater management plan. And I believe the traffic impact statement has been done, and I think he may be able to comment on that, as it has been forwarded to him for his review. In terms of public participation, we had survey results. I did these up today, so the 16th. We had 97% of respondents in favor. We had 33 responses, so we had 1 opposed, or 3% for the 32 responses. So it's been an overwhelmingly positive response to the online survey. In terms of what else we've done in terms of the public engagement, well, we did the 2 information sessions, or the developer did 2 information sessions at the library. We did an application notice on the on the property itself. There was a sign posted on the 27th of August. We did an information post on the town's website, and those are updated throughout the process. That started on June 24th, and we did a mail out to the 67 property owners located within 150 meters of the subject properties on the 28th of August as well. In terms of next steps, so again, I mentioned we were at step 3, so the next step in the process is to move on to step 4. And that would be the public hearing step, where there's a decision made by council, and the public hearing has been already scheduled for October 7th at 6 p.m. So again, it's at 6 p.m., which is a little unusual for council. They've scheduled a special evening meeting because of the public interest in this application. So that'll be at 6 p.m. October 7th. And at today's meeting, PAC members are expected to make the recommendation to council, and the recommendation may include conditions or be subject to the submission of additional information. And I just wanted to say again that I think it's probably, in terms of the flow of the meeting, it would be better if I did both presentations and there's presentation from the applicant before we made a motion and recommendation for each of these separately.
I don't know, you moved through these very quickly. They're both 2 significant applications. And I think we should have made that decision at the time of the agenda, to amend the agenda to have them both. I would personally prefer to deal with them one at a time. The whole point of breaking them up was because we needed to deal with them separately.
Okay, I am asking still that the committee deal with them separately in terms of motions, separate motions. But what I think would be, it was confusing last time where I gave a presentation on one, and then the developer gave a presentation on both, and then I gave the second presentation, if you may recall.
I do recall that.
So it's possible that I can do my well, that's kind of the same what I'm proposing. So I don't know what you'd prefer in terms of flow.
My preference, but it will be up to the will of the committee in its entirety, is to deal with them separately, for you to present twice.
I am planning on presenting the second half after this. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you. I'm going to present this one.
Yes?
And then I have a separate presentation for the Logan Street, for the main factory redevelopment as
Yes.
a separate presentation. Then I will close my presentation. We'll allow you guys can ask me questions about either one. Then the developer would be open to make their presentation. You can ask them questions. And then after that, there may be an opportunity for the public to speak, and then we can have a vote. And then you'd have two separate recommendations.
I have questions about this, what you've just presented, but I'll leave it to the will of the committee, if that's the will of the committee.
So I'm going to do one more presentation after this, and then you can ask me questions about either one and the developer about either one. Or you can ask me questions now, I suppose.
What is the will of the committee is what I would like to.
Madam Chair, I don't mind if we have, excuse me, I don't mind if we have Mr. Fox presented both presentations, one after the other, but I would like to isolate the discussion of the Queen Street and to Logan Street, at least isolate the discussion. I know there's some overlapping concerns. I have some overlapping concerns in that maybe one project can address the concerns of another project. So I think we are going to get into discussion of both of them together at some point. But I would like to at least, because it'll be very confusing if we're trying to pass a motion on two different projects and discussing them at the same time. So I would like to discuss them, present everything, but then discuss them as a separate motion, the project separately. If that makes sense?
Yeah, we'll certainly have the motions separate, and I think if there are any recommendations from the committee, of course, we'll want to clarify to which project those recommendations apply. But I agree, I think for Jason last time, or Planner Fox, it was hard to keep the discussion working and flowing when we were moving away from one, and when, of course, we know they are so intertwined. So if I will remain cognizant of everyone's concerns as best I can.
Okay,
It's
so
just that some parts of this are going to be lumped together. Stormwater management, I mean, the whole project is going to be considered at once, and I don't know how you can separate one and say, well, the other part doesn't work as well as the first part. I mean, it's one large project. We have to consider the project as a whole, I think. But parts of it have some things that impact Logan Street more than others, but
so I think that
I know it's difficult.
the thinking at the time when I broke these up was one's very much urban corridor downtown kind of development. The other one is on the periphery of the downtown and has floodplain issues. One doesn't have floodplain issues. One is more about urban streetscape and that kind of, so they're kind of two separate.
Well, when you talk about floodplain issues, Mr. Stanfield and his contractors have people that he hires to take care of their worries about floodplains and issues and how to conform to the bylaws. And, you know, I don't know, we can talk all day about floodplain issues, but again, we're going to have to rely upon people who had better knowledge than you and I.
Okay, I'm just going to wrap up the first one. We will be talking about floodplain in detail, I think, in a few minutes when we get into the other part of the development. But in terms of recommendation from staff on this, as reflected in the staff report that was circulated, so the recommendation is to approve with conditions. The council approved the application by Stanfields Limited to enter into a development agreement with the town to permit a mixed-use development consisting of 192 dwelling units and 377 square meters of commercial space, subject to the following conditions: that the facade of the first 3 stories is situated at the established front yard setback on Queen Street, and the upper floors are set back an additional 4.5 meters, or about 15 feet. And the second condition there is the submission of a stormwater management plan and a traffic impact statement that have been approved by the town engineer. So that concludes my first presentation, and so I'm a little confused as to how you want me to proceed, but I think I'm going to move on to the second one now.
I think you should proceed, and if people have questions or clarification that they wish with respect to what Planner Fox has presented to this point, I would encourage you to write those down specific to those. Like I have a couple myself, so I'm just going to hold those off until the end, just in case they're answered.
Okay, so the second component of the application, or the applications that we're talking about tonight, the second sort of piece of this is the 1 Logan Street application. So this is the portion of the development that impacts the factory itself proper, not the parking lot on Queen Street. So a lot of this is going to be a bit repetitive, so I will try and skip over those pieces, but it is an application for the redevelopment of the most of the lands, the textile mill buildings and lands. The application does not include the parking lot on Queen Street. That's a separate application we discussed previously. This application was also made on June 20th, and it is a mixed-use development consisting of 331 dwelling units and 4,789 square meters, or about 51,500 square feet of office commercial space in 6 buildings. The proposal includes newly constructed buildings and renovated repurposed industrial buildings, together with approximately 6,350 square meters of riverfront public open space. Okay, in terms of where we are in the process, again, similar to the last one, we're at step 3. I'm not going to go spend a lot of time on this, other than to say we went through step 1 back in June 24th. We also had everything was posted on the website, same exact process we did in the last one. So we're now looking at step 3. The biggest difference between this one and the other one was the request. All the requests were the same. The only big difference is that this one has the floodplain mitigation request as part of this development. So again, the applicant has submitted the traffic impact study, which applies to this development as well as the tree planting and retention plan. And we did the same public engagement survey, public survey. We did the same posting of signs on the property as well. So in terms of the subject land, so again, this is the Queen Street proposal up here in the dashed yellow line. The solid yellow line is the Stanfield's textile factory proper, and that's the area that's subject to this portion of the application. So this is 1 Logan Street and actually 9 Bayview Street as well. Total area of the subject lands is around 28,900 square meters, or about 7.15 acres. There is approximately 47 feet or 14.4 meters of frontage on Bayview Street, and about 29 meters or 95 feet of frontage on Logan Street. The calculations do not include the applicant's other lands on Lorne and Queen Streets, and this development will have the street that we talked about, the east-west street running through the site. That's going to be a private street that actually connects to Lorne as well. So it does connect right through the site. The lands and buildings closest to Lawrence Street will continue to be used in conjunction with the Stanfield's textile industry. So that's the building, if you can see my mouse pointer, way over here. This is to be expanded as part of the proposal, and that will continue to house the industrial use at the site and the warehousing and distribution. So again, pretty familiar with the subject lands from the last discussion. A little less impact on this portion of the development on Queen Street. It's lower and it's further away from Queen, but it does still have some impact on Bayview Street and also on Logan Street. So this is the town's plan documents. This is the policy area map showing that the lands are entirely within the regional service policy area, and that the lands are zoned regional service with a 1 in 100 and 1 in 20 overlay, which means they're in the Salmon River floodplain and susceptible to their flood risk area. So this is a conceptual plan of the development showing the buildings on the north side of the site. The applicant has submitted preliminary plans for the redevelopment of this portion of the property, and the key feature of the proposal is the publicly accessible amenity space, public space along the river, but there is some private space there as well, but a lot of it is proposed to be public. There's a large plaza, a naturalized riparian zone, a shared lawn, and there's also a boardwalk shown on this plan. There's also, again, this is the east-west street that runs through the site that does actually go over and connect to Lawrence Street to the left-hand side of the screen, and over here on the right-hand side, it also connects us to Bayview Street and to Logan Street at the bottom of the screen. There's also a potential the AT connections here, so you can see the proposed riverfront walk here. There is some private landowners here, but the idea is that the connection would be along the riverfront to Riverfront Park over here, potentially, hopefully having some sort of a AT crossing into Bible Hill, which could then connect to the Dal AC Trail. So there's really great opportunities for connections there. Also, really great opportunities for connections on this end because it potentially connects to CEC, but also can follow the dikes all the way out to the Fundy Discovery site. And that would be an amazing opportunity to create a trail system there as well, which would tie us into not only the Fundy Discovery site, but potentially the Nova Scotia Blue Route, which is the provincial cycling route. So it's real potential here to bring a lot of active transportation traffic into the downtown. So in terms of the development proposal, this is just an overview of the site. So the preliminary proposal does include, as I mentioned, 331 dwelling units and 4,789 square meters of commercial space. There's 6 buildings, including one new structure, which is this 8-story building over here. The rest of it is either expansions or additions or reuse of existing structures. All buildings are connected by a common ground level parkade, and so you go from one end to the other in a common parkade. I'll show you that plan in a second. Remainder of the proposal is comprised of repurposed industrial buildings, mostly involving the addition of new upper floors to the existing structures. So the proposal includes an 11-story tower, I'm calling it, which would be here, and then there's a 6-story building, I think here, and then there's a 5-story building here, as well as an 8-story building here. So given the subject land's location in the floodplain, the applicant has opted to reserve the ground floor for parking, commercial and residential supports. That would be things like lobbies, common areas, and amenity spaces, as opposed to actually having any dwelling units. So there are no residential dwelling units located at grade or within a flood risk area. It's an overview of the proposal looking southwest, showing the river in the foreground. And then you can see the boardwalk connection there, and the school board or the Regional Center for Education offices in the background over here. This is a view of that proposed internal street, the east-west street that runs through the site. And then another view from the river of the development, and then the shadow study, which the consultant's going to address in a few minutes. And there's the tree planting, retention, and removal plan as well. I circulated copies of this to committee members and also to the town's urban forestry coordinator. So this is a view of the floor plan of the parking retail level of the proposed development. So you can see that the blue color, hopefully that shows up as blue on everyone's screen. The blue color is the parking garage. And you can see there's an access on the Bayview side, and there's also an access on the Lawrence Street side. Into the parking garage, which extends through the whole building on the ground floor of the existing factory buildings, with some additions and alterations. And then there's the purple, which is the retail commercial spaces at grade, and the white, I believe, would be like residential support. So things like lobbies, common areas, amenity space, gyms, that kind of thing. And this is the upper floor, just showing there are some additional commercial spaces on the upper level, and then there's a lot of private amenity space for tenants, and then there's also public space all along the river with a large public plaza here and a lot of opportunities for commercial retail development along the river. So this is the enabling policy that allows council to consider this application. It's policy RS 36. And then some of the review that staff conducted, we did identify a few issues, as well as some areas where it complied with town's policies. So in terms of issues, we had the building height, land use compatibility, parking, need for a stormwater management plan, the need for a traffic impact statement, and also some flood risk mitigation, pardon me. And the proposal, as I mentioned, also aligns with many of the town's planning policies, and that includes increased residential densities in the downtown. So we like to see, for a long time now, we've been promoting more residential downtown to support goods and services in the downtown area and support vitality on downtown streets. So that's an important one. New dwelling units on existing infrastructure. So again, this is that idea of intensification or increased residential densities on existing and new development on existing infrastructure, as opposed to requiring extensions to municipal services and roads on the suburban areas of town, which is an expensive way to accommodate new growth. This is a much more cost-effective way of doing that. We have walkable neighborhoods, the big one. Appropriate land use mix. This is a great opportunity for a mixture of sort of a comprehensive community that offers the goods and services for people who live there as well as the larger public. So it's a great opportunity for a land use mix, appropriate land use mix. And there's also the contribution to the town's pedestrian open space network, which I've already touched on a little bit. And the following slides do provide a brief overview of these issues. Height is, again, a bit of a concern on this one, less so than the Queen Street development, but it's not really expected to create any significant compatibility issues because most of the neighboring residential uses consist of converted dwellings that themselves contain intensive multi-unit residential uses. The closest single detached dwelling is about 100 feet away from the nearest structure, and it's over 60 meters or almost 200 feet away from the proposed 11-story structure. And the proposal meets most of the regional service area zone height limits, the notable exception being the proposed 11-story structure. And overall, staff believe the proposal will have a positive impact on the community, and that council should not apply the regional service height zone limits to this development. In terms of land use compatibility, it is a more intensive use than the surrounding neighborhood. It is noted that the intensity of the use is largely internalized to the development and oriented to the proposed street that runs east-west through the site. Proposal does it, but several less intensive residential uses on Queen Street and 2 properties at the end of Logan Street. All these properties, with the exception of 13 Logan, are multi-unit residential conversions, and staff do not anticipate any land use conflicts with these adjacent uses due to a combination of landscaping and appropriate setbacks. And in fact, if you look at 13 Logan Street specifically, which is the only single-family home abutting the site, they actually have landscaping, large landscaped area, which is now a paved parking lot that would be separating the proposal from that development. In terms of parking, the proposal includes 241 stalls, resulting in a commercial parking ratio, a parking ratio of 0.73 spaces per unit for 331 units. This does not include commercial parking requirement. In the regional service zone, the calculated parking requirement would be almost 500 spaces, which is 1.5 spaces per 2-bedroom unit for the residential component and over 200 spaces for the retail component. However, staff recommend that council apply the reduced downtown parking requirements to this development, given the proposal is really within 15-minute walk or 2 kilometers of most downtown amenities and services, including both the grocery stores, a lot of employment opportunities, and most downtown services. If the downtown parking requirements are applied, this proposal would require just 249 spaces, and this development would be just 8 short of the parking requirement. Flood mitigation is the big one that I keep mentioning. So the town's current floodplain regulations permit limited development within the floodplain, and any structures are required to be flood-proofed, which essentially just means that structures are to be protected by an earthen berm around their base with no openings below 9 centimeters above the 1/100 flood elevation. The Stanfield's textile mill buildings are situated in the 1/20 and 1/100 floodplain, and would normally be required to be flood-proofed. However, they do predate the town's current development regulations, and they are not flood-proofed in accordance with these requirements. So the existing buildings on the Stanfield site are considered existing non-conforming structures, and there's lots of protections, and they're essentially grandfathered by provisions of the Municipal Government Act and the town's planning documents. Now, in terms, staff do support the proposed redevelopment reuse of the expansion of the existing structure. This will allow for the conversion of a large industrial complex into a new mixed-use neighborhood, and with an incredible network of open spaces and riverfront green space, all located on the edge of Truro's downtown. Staff are, however, concerned about allowing this development in a flood risk area without requiring any flood mitigation efforts. So it is noted that the ground level is reserved for non-residential uses, so that's good. No dwelling units are proposed to be situated below the 1/100 or 1/20 flood elevations. While existing structures are effectively grandfathered, staff recommend that council require any new structures at grade address flood risk and incorporate flood mitigation measures that have been designed by a professional engineer. And staff are also recommending that council only approve this development where a professional engineer also confirms that the development not contribute to upstream or downstream flooding or result in a change to flood flow patterns. And I know that the applicant has an engineer hired and they are working on this, and I had a brief discussion with them beforehand about that. Hopefully they'll have some more details on that as time goes on. In terms of the open space, sorry, I skipped a slide. So, oh, no, I didn't. So in terms of the other policy review here, we did talk about the open space pedestrian network, and I mentioned this. I'm just going to touch on it again briefly just to say, again, all the connections that it potentially could create, but also there is a local economic development piece to this as well. So the proposal will add over 300 new dwelling units on the edge of the Truro's downtown commercial area. It will also increase the customer base for downtown businesses and strengthen Truro's position as a retail and service destination for the region. But the proposal, and what's important about all this, is the proposal will develop important new connections to the region's pedestrian open space network, and this is expected to greatly increase foot traffic in the downtown and enhance the vibrancy of downtown streets. This will reinforce downtown Truro's appeal as a destination and help draw a larger customer base for local entrepreneurs, businesses, and services. And the proposal with its riverfront location and unique architecture will greatly increase the aesthetics and appeal of a prominent location in Truro's downtown. And by creating this new mixed-use neighborhood with pedestrian-friendly streets, connections to the regional active transportation network, and attractive riverfront public spaces, it is expected that the town will be more attractive for entrepreneurs and businesses to invest in Truro. And attracting and retaining young entrepreneurs is also a key strategy for generating local economic activity. And this proposal, with the potential for improved active transportation connections to the Dal campus, promises to encourage students to remain in Truro and invest in our community. And I did skip over. No, I guess no, sorry, my apologies. So in terms of review by other departments, on September 5th, the town's urban forestry coordinator, again, we sent it out to all the same parties that received the other application, and again, all comments were positive. The town engineer traffic authority has requested that the applicant provide a traffic impact statement and stormwater management plan, and I suspect, although it wasn't mentioned, I suspect they're also looking forward to seeing a flood mitigation strategy for the site. In terms of survey results, for the mail-out or the online survey that we conducted, we had 39 responses. 38 of those, or 97.4%, were in favor. We only had 1 opposed, or 2.6%. We also did all the same public engagement that we did for the 179 Queen Street application. And we are also at step 4 on this application. So we'd be at this meeting looking for committee members to make a recommendation to council, and it may be subject to additional conditions or submission of additional information. And the application is now expected to proceed to step 4, public hearing and decision by council, and that public hearing has also been scheduled for October the 7th at 6 p.m. In terms of the recommendation, we're looking to, recommendation is to approve with conditions, so that council approve the application by Stanfields to enter into a development agreement with the town to permit a mixed-use development consisting of 331 dwelling units and 4,789 square meters of office commercial space, subject to the following conditions, and that is that any new structure must either meet the town's floodplain development requirements, or the applicant must submit a flood mitigation strategy for any new structure in a flood risk area that has been prepared by a licensed professional engineer. Also, that there's a submission of a stormwater management plan and traffic impact statement that have been approved by the town engineer. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Do you mind, just for the committee's benefit and those listening, the next step that you have mentioned on both of these, and I apologize if I'm not catching it, is both the public consultation and council's approval, or?
For next steps in the process, where we go from here, we're at step 4, which is we're at step 3 right now, so what we're going to be doing next is going to step 4, which is a public hearing and decision by council. So this would be sort of the end of the public engagement process, happens at this stage as well. We've done all the mailouts, the surveys. We will be providing all the survey information to council at this time as well, be provided to them for their benefit. And at this point, essentially all that happens is there's the public hearing, which is advertised on the town's website and on our social media, and we would be looking for a staff would be presenting a final report and recommendation at that time.
Okay, so just clarifying, that is the last opportunity for the public to be engaged, and it is when the decision would be made.
Correct, and that's been scheduled again, I think it's October 7th at 6 p.m.
Great, thank you. Okay, so as usual, we have the applicant has sent some representatives to, and we welcome you to come to the microphone and provide your name and information. I understand Mr. Bezanson and Mr. LeBlanc are here. I think you've been here before. And then another gentleman, I'm sorry, don't recognize you, but you're certainly welcome to come down as well. I think we have some members of the public who may or may not want to speak, and again, you're welcome to do that maybe after we've spoken a little bit with the applicant. So if one of you would like to come down, the committee members may have some questions that you would have the information for.
Great to be here again and hopefully answer some questions that may still be lingering about the project, and we should be able to answer whatever questions you have tonight. We've gone through the presentation in detail twice previously, so today we're going to focus on some of the project updates. In the last presentation we talked a bit, and I'll show some of the changes that happened. Tonight is really about focusing on the floodplain issues and the traffic impact study that's been completed, and we can answer any questions as we go along. Jason's given a good overview, but what we're really talking about here is a transformative type project for the town. It's essentially taking a piece of industrial infrastructure and turning it into a mixed-use development that turns its front back onto the river and creates substantial open space connections throughout the town and really enlivens the river. And at the same time takes a very large parking lot, or what we call missing teeth, on this important urban street on Queen Street, and infills it with a building. And I might add, all the parking for that building has been located underground. And in fact, much of the parking for this entire development has been located underground, so that we're minimizing the urban heat island effect, and we're minimizing the amount of runoff that happens. Most of buildings A through E is already either the roof of buildings or their parking lots, and we're introducing a significant amount of green space into the plan. Some of these green spaces are fully public, and so the intention would be to identify an easement for the town to prepare this Greenway River Walk. And some of them are private public spaces, and by that I mean they're owned by the developer, but the intention is to maintain them as public spaces open to residents. And then there's a couple of spaces that will likely be private public spaces, so they'll be private and mostly reserved for residents of the building. We're also looking at the rooftops of these buildings as well, looking at adding solar where it makes sense, green roofs where it makes sense as well to minimize the stormwater runoff. And in particular, Building G, which when we started this process had a large parking lot out front, is now fully a landscape and accessible space. You've seen different views, and just to reflect on why some of the range in heights, when you look at the distillery district in Toronto or any of these industrial sites that have been redeveloped, one of the characteristics is that the buildings tend to be built over 100 years or so. There's a range of heights, there's a range of scales, and so we thought in paying homage to this industrial use that really gave rise to Truro, making sure that we had a good variety of different building heights, that the skyline was articulated much like it is today. Just some of the last ones, of course, we increased the setback from it was a couple of meters to get it almost 4 meters setback to better align with the fronts of the existing buildings. And so we simply shifted the building a couple of meters back off of Queen Street. We had a larger public plaza on this new Stanfield Street, and that's shrunk ever so slightly. Shouldn't have any impact on the streetscape character of this new street. That new street is intended to be a fully public street that would be turned over to the town. I think that's our intention. It will be designed and built, though, by the developer to meet any requirements that the town might have for standards. And so just a picture of what it looked like prior to the last meeting, and of course pushing it back in line with some of the existing buildings. An overall massing of the building and just some of the characteristics of this building G, which is more integrated into the residential neighborhoods that surround it, is we've got a series of street wall step back, so a 4 and a 5-story street wall step back along Queen Street, and that's been purposely designed. We can chat about the reason for that height and the intention here. And we've also stepped back from the side yards, so we have along the adjacent residential properties side yard and rear yard step backs as well. And those are designed to minimize the scale of the towers that are above them, but it's also primarily to minimize wind shear that comes down the building, so it minimizes the impact of wind on the surrounding neighborhoods. And as well, if those were to extend straight up, it impacts shadows, so it's designed to reduce the shadowing on neighboring properties as well. A traffic impact assessment was completed and passed in last Friday, I believe, by Roger Boychuk, who isn't able to be here tonight. He's in Vancouver presenting another project, but he's a transportation engineer with 30 years experience doing these large-scale projects. So Roger's team went out with a MyoVision Scout, placed the Scout around, and it's an automatic traffic counter, so it distinguishes between trucks and people and cars and bikes and that sort of thing, and gives us traffic counts for each of the intersections. From there, he's able to determine the level of service currently for those streets, and for the most part, all of the 4 surrounding streets are all level A of service. There is from Bayview onto the neighboring street, the left turn is at currently a level D or a level C, so it's the only one that's not in the greatest shape. And so what Roger does is he takes the population data, the commercial and residential uses that currently, or that are proposed for this development. It's run through a traffic simulation to simulate how the traffic will impact the surrounding intersections. And through Roger's findings, this development still gives a very high level of service. It's still an A level of service when the development's built. And I should say that his modeling didn't consider the existing uses that are already generating some traffic. And so when those are moved over to another area, the additional traffic will be over and above what's currently there. So his overall findings in the report is that there's a very good level of service in essentially all situations during the critical peak period. So that's both morning AM peak and afternoon PM peak. And he notes that the only single movement where there may be some delays experienced is the left turn from Bayview onto Walker Street, which is currently constricted now. Due to the relatively high volumes on Walker Street. He does mention in the report there's signal timing. There's a number of things that could be done to improve the surrounding context as this development builds out over the next 10 to 15 years. I'm going to pass it over to Rob for a second, who will talk about stormwater and floodplain.
Thank you. Rob Bezanson, MEC Engineering. So the property itself, as Planner Fox had noted earlier in his presentation, the existing factory structure, as the bulk of the property that's being grandfathered, is currently at a floor level more or less of around 13.36 meters, which is, depending upon where you assess it, either above or below the 1 in 100 floodproofing requirements that are current. The floodproof for the 1 in 100 on the property varies just in excess of 1 meter from one side of the property to the other. For instance, what was designated as Building H, it's actually not shown on there, but it's the new factory portion. The floodproof for current standards would be 12.58 meters, would be the minimum floor opening at that location. On the east end, where proposed Building A would be, it's 13.88 meters. So it's quite a significant jump. The obvious plan, of course, is to floodproof the new Building A to the current standards, along with the expansion of the factory portion, Building H on the east end. The intent with H is to basically adhere to the existing finished floor of the factory, which is also at about 13.36 meters. So we would be floodproofing that to the requirement of 12.58 or higher. The Building A on the east end would be floodproof to 1388, and although the access into that structure would be at 1388, the parking level would still be at 1336. There would be a ramp down within the structure to get to finished floor. Excuse me. The grading plan right now, unfortunately, is not complete. We're still a little bit of flux there. As you can appreciate, it's a fairly involved site. There's a lot of moving parts in it. And we're still working on getting the volumes for the infill for the 1 to 100 to floodproof A, and the additional fill that's going along the north wall of the development against the river. Excuse me, that some of that would be considered to be infill of the 1 to 100. As Planner Fox said, the existing floor structures in there, elevations are around 12.5 behind the building. Although the building itself, the floor is at 1336, exterior grade is around 12.5 currently. So we do have some fill to put in there to floodproof the back wall of that development. And just we're in the process now of getting the different surfaces modeled so we can compute the final volumes of infill so we can do counteracting balances on the northeast portion of our site. Do I have a cursor here? It'd be up in this area from here along the dike that we plan to do a balance cut, and adjacent on the other side of the river on the other Stanfield's property here.
Mr. Bezanson, can I just interrupt you?
Certainly.
Our sound system is so terrible here, it's muffled. Can you speak as close to the microphone as possible? It's
speak a little
very
closer?
hard to hear you from this seat.
Okay.
Thank you.
My apologies. I didn't want to be deafening anyone, so. Was there any questions other than, or did anything you'd like me to repeat? Okay, well, that was pretty much the extent of what I had prepared, actually. You picked a good time.
Do any members of the committee have any questions for Mr. Bezanson?
My question isn't for Mr. Bezanson because, I mean, that is very technical presentation that a lot of it I can't relate to and I don't have a point of reference to do so. My question therefore would be for our town's engineer. Have you had the opportunity to review this yet? Have you signed off on this? We don't usually get this level of information at our PAC, so.
Yeah, that's correct. You're referring to the stormwater management
Yes.
or
as-
traffic or both?
Both.
Okay.
Like, I really.
I can
just
make
like you-
comments. I can make comments on both for you.
That would be appreciated.
They're just comments I had in general. So no, the stormwater management plan I have not seen as of yet. The main concern with stormwater management on a floodplain is that it's as much about not blocking water from draining through the property from and impacting properties above it. Fortunately, Stanfields have hired the engineer Rob Bezanson. He's dealt with this before on other properties on the floodplain, so he has experience doing this. So that's something that's we're very fortunate to have. Also, most of the area that's being developed is already hardscape, so matching the pre and post probably won't be that big of a deal. It's going to be more about the flood water management more than anything. For traffic, I've gone through the traffic plan initially, and it's basically saying what we thought it would, that there's not going to be any negative impact of the development on our street network, but conversely, our street network might negatively impact the development because people might shortcut through the site. So they're going to work on further details on that to try to mitigate that, which is a great idea. And I'll have some comments back to the traffic engineer. Like I would like to see more details on where the driveway access is going to be to building G, I believe it is, on Queen Street, because that could change some of the results of the study. But other than that, I'm very comfortable with both.
Okay. My follow-up question has escaped me. Oh, I remember, I believe in our new community plan that there is a requirement that the engineer follow it through. The engineer who signs, once you've signed off on the engineer who has created these plans, it's the responsibility of that engineer to follow the plans through to completion. And I assume that will be the case this time as well?
Yeah, that was an internal policy that we did. It's not in the new MPS. It's just an internal policy that we did when it comes time for an engineer to sign off on a stormwater management plan, that they commit to seeing it through to the project end and be responsible for the finished product.
And I assume that will be applicable
Yes.
this time. Thank you.
Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, Mr. Bezanson, I just want to ask you about storm, the floodwater, not stormwater management, but floodwater, because I've been around long enough to remember the river leaving its banks and moving at quite a high speed, several meters from where the river normally tracks, so we're talking about quite a rapid flow of water. And I'm just wondering how you plan to flood-proof or floodwater management around the existing buildings, not the new building, not A, but some of the older buildings that have been there since the late 1800s. Like, can you explain that to me?
Certainly. As you can tell by the second plan that's up on the screen there now, and I do have a cursor, the density of the contours in this location. I'm sorry, can you hear me, Councillor Hinton? Okay, sorry. I'll try not to deafen anyone. So the density of the contours here shows a fairly steep slope behind the building. It's going to be the naturalized riparian zone going down to the riverbank. That is being infilled essentially to the top of the parking structure, which would be in the vicinity of 15.5 to 16 meters above sea level, which is higher than the 1 to 100 floodplain. Now, any fill above the 1 to 100 does not need to be balanced, but it's only that fill between existing grade and the 100-year event, or 100-year surface that we have to account for. But the intent, of course, is to raise that area behind the existing buildings and to basically add additional floodproofing protection along that back portion. And that would be encompassed with the boardwalk and some of the amenity spaces as well.
And when you refer to them as riparian areas, are you planning on, when you put that backfill in, there's not going to be rock there, there'll be some sort of grass species or something to hold the soil in place? Is that the idea, or what?
There will be a combination of vegetation and rock fill that would be armor stone.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor Hinton?
Thank you. I wanted to thank you for the presentation. I am very concerned about, anyone who's lived here their whole life is very concerned about flooding and the speed and the rapidity of the way the water can rush there. Very concerning. And concern for not only the development, but to the surrounding areas, from Normandy to all these outlining areas and streets. That really concerns me, building in a flood zone. So having the engineer sign off, you can have to appreciate, anyone who's lived here, my concern.
No,
Because,
it's understandable.
I remember people being taken out in boats and things like that. So I know this, and I know a lot of people have said to me, why are we building in a flood zone? So I want to hear more comments. I want to hear if there's any comments tonight from anyone in the gallery. I just want to go on record as saying that. I've had other issues as far as the shadowing, and I did ask for more information on that. But the flood zone and the stormwater management, to me, is a top priority here. And that's my concern right now.
And just to be clear, it is flood zone, and areas in here that have flooded 100 years ago are going to flood tomorrow. This will not stop the flooding situation in Truro. The intent behind the mitigation process for this site is to not cause any detrimental effects that would worsen the situation. If anything, we're going to try and make a betterment of it. But if Noah's rain comes down and floods Truro this weekend, whether this was built or not, it's still going to flood. So it's just a matter of, we're not going to worsen any situation that is currently there. Our only attempt is to mitigate what's there and perhaps make it a bit of a betterment to the situation for the whole.
Just one thing that Councilor or Planner Fox's recommendation for the first application, the Queen Street application, had the recommendation that the first 3 stories be situated at the setback and the upper floors are moved back. But in the presentation that you gave, Mr. Bezanson, that the image was still showing the original proposal. Is the applicant expecting to make a revision there, or will it be presented to council, and will we be expected to provide our...
Yeah, so... Sorry. We've set back the building, so there's a difference between a setback and a step back, and that gets confusing sometimes. The setback is the building's location away from the right-of-way, so we have set it back further than we had. We've got the step back, which I believe is in the 4.5 meter range, so we're in that 15 meter range that Jason referenced. The Mr. Fox talked about a 3-story street wall. We're still showing a 4 and a 5-story. There's a very small piece of 5-story street wall and a 4-story. And there's a number of reasons we've done that, but we are going to be presenting to the Heritage Advisory Council coming up. We'll get some feedback. I think the owner and the architects have a number of reasons why they're proposing that, that articulation, which I can get into if you want me to speak a little bit about it. But I think we're waiting to hear what comes out of the HAC meeting to see whether there's some firm recommendations to decrease.
Thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Graham?
I was wondering, Mr. Fox, if you could bring up the slide titled "The Impact on Streetscape" regarding the development at 179. I'd missed what number that was. And my question will apply to both reports, so we can deal with them. I guess the first one for this Queen Street application, and then we'll do it with the Logan Street one.
Sorry, which slide were you referencing?
Well, I don't know the number of it, but it is, the title of the slide was "Impact on Streetscape."
And it was one of my slides?
It was one of yours, and it was in reference to 179 Queen Street. There. Did you find it?
Yep.
So it falls sort of to our question by our chair, but I would like for us to look at these in detail, and I'd like the developer to please comment on each of those bullets and comment how they view the suggestions or concerns as presented by our planner to ensure that they are addressed. I think that they might have been, but it went so fast I couldn't keep up. So could you address each of those bullets?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So there is some question about the 6-story section. So essentially the street face on Queen Street is proposed as there's a piece of 4-story street wall, there's a little piece of 5-story street wall, and then there's a 6-story piece that's stepped back. And generally the concern with that is if the street wall were to come down to, say, 2 stories, it's as you're walking along a sidewalk, you can see the 6 stories fully. The higher up the street wall goes, the more stepped back it is, the more you don't notice the additional height. So that's part of the reason why we've got kind of 4-story on one end, a little piece of 5-story on the other end. And there's also the idea of articulating that street facade. So I think what Halifax has found, they set their street wall heights range from 3 stories to 6 stories for a street wall. And where there tends to be a problem is that it's continuous. So you always have the same height along the building facade. And some of the more interesting projects in other cities are looking now at articulated street walls. So you allow for one street wall at a certain height and then it steps up or steps down. That also breaks up the wind a little bit more, but it's mostly designed so that the upper portion of the street wall, which is set back, it's designed to make that recede into the background a little bit more. So I think that deals with kind of the 6-story section being a potential issue.
Again, following up on Ms. Gorley Davis, the recommendation was that the facade of the first 3 stories is situated at the establishment front yard setback on Queen. So is that adhered to?
So I guess it isn't adhered to, and I guess I want to make this very clear. This committee is required to consider, and so is council actually, is required to consider whether or not the proposal meets the urban design standards for the downtown or for the urban corridor zone. So what I've done, my recommendation is, what I've given you is, in order to comply fully with the urban design standards for the downtown, it would have to have a 3-story street wall. Okay? But the applicant is proposing to vary from that. And it's up to this committee and to council and to Heritage to consider the ramifications or the implications of varying from the normal requirement, which you are entitled to do, and council is entitled to do, because you're only meant to consider those urban design standards as part of your deliberations on this development. So you're not bound to them. Now, I, on the other hand, when I wrote my report, I wanted to say, listen, in order to fully comply with our policies or our standards, this is what you would need to do. But it's a very subjective requirement, and as you can hear from Mr. LeBlanc, there's a different way of interpreting it. Other people may interpret it differently. I'm just telling you what our town plan says, and I feel that it should meet that, but I also don't disagree that it is a subjective requirement, and it's really up to sort of the eye of the beholder whether or not you feel it fits into the streetscape. Yeah, so I'm not going to give you an easy out there. I'm just going to tell you it's really back on this committee to make a call, a judgment call on whether or not, I mean, there is very different perspectives on what impacts the streetscape, so.
Difficult to go against our planner's advice, though.
It happens all the time. It's all right. And honestly, I hadn't considered some aspects of what he was talking about when I was making my arguments for this when we talked about it at plan review. So these are all things that are very subjective and very hard to hammer down into a very specific policy and requirement. That's why you have the discretion to make a judgment call on a case-by-case basis, and you're not bound to adhere to those requirements.
So would we, when it comes time to make our decision this evening, will we have to reconsider this part of your recommendation? Or is that what we would amend this recommendation, I think? Yes. And you would favor that too? Sorry, I didn't catch the last part. And you would be supportive of an amendment to the recommendation?
No. Oh, hello.
Now I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, you're not. Yeah, no, sorry, I forgot now what I was going to say. Damn.
I think that might be putting Planner Fox in a bit of a tricky spot, but I think it's nice that we're having the conversation, and I think the explanation was really quite fascinating, the fact that because I think, you'd think that the wall, the shorter would be better, but by the explanation about the shorter can actually make the receding part seem taller. I find that really interesting. So maybe we just continue the discussion for a bit longer.
Okay. If you'd like to continue, then we can leave that and decide when it comes time to amend it or not, and we can move on to the second.
Yeah, I think just to step back just for a second to a process like this where you have a development agreement gives you guys some flexibility, gives the architects and the developers some flexibility, whereas if this were an as of right and there was very strict built form requirements, you would have to adhere to those. So we think it's the best thing for the site for a number of reasons. I should also mention, Matt mentioned to me that the setback requirement is somewhere around 4 meters, and we're quite a bit set back even further than that as well to maximize the public space out in front. And so we'll have some really street trees and plazas and landscaping as well. Concerned about the scale of the proposed building in relation to the 1.5 to 2.5. That is what's there now, and it's just the typical evolution of an urban street. You tend to have, what was once a small little cabin on a very empty street starts to fill in over time. I think if you look at most even R1 standards, the typical height is 35 feet or 11 meters. So our first street wall at 4 stories is pretty consistent with what you would find in a residential neighborhood as a maximum height. So while the front setback appropriately matches the neighboring properties, the massing scale of the 4 to 4 5-story facade doesn't complement the neighborhood structures. So again, it's had those structures been built, and over time they will change. That's just the nature of an urban street. Because there hasn't been a whole lot of change in the town, we still have 1.5-story structures on our main urban corridors. That's just the nature of evolving streets. And then lastly, by varying so significantly from the typical height and massing, this proposal will not reinforce the elements of the existing streetscape to help pedestrians perceive the scale. So again, this is the evolution of the street. We're moving from what might have been an 11-meter or 4-story maximum height in an area like this, and we're bringing the street wall up to 4 stories and a maximum height of 6 stories. And I should say that in most downtowns, even small towns like Wolfville or Lunenburg now are looking at 8 stories as kind of a minimum height. So 6 stories is still pretty small by most standards, even small town standards. That's but it does mean that the neighboring buildings, if they happen to be 1.5 meter, feel a little dwarfed to the new buildings.
Okay.
Anything more, Councillor Graham? No? Yes. Not for now? Okay.
Except to say that we had, our planner had identified some concerns with the Logan Street development as well, and I was hoping that, but maybe there's more discussion on this before we move to that. That I would like the feedback from the developer in the same way.
Councillor Thomas.
Yes, good evening. Looking at it, I'm quite concerned about that 4 and then 4 to 6. I don't like it. I made this known to you in the very first meeting, that the height and bulk and scale of the buildings were for large for Queen Street. I have no opposition to what happens on the Logan Street project, the 11 stories, it's down by the river, et cetera. I think it's well suited for that area. But I think the mass of this building, the height of it is too great. So I want to propose this. In fact, it's very similar to what the planner has proposed, and that's a 3 and then a setback in 2, so that it'll be 5, because the maximum in that area is, by right is 4-story, and it actually 3 and then up to a maximum of 4 in the urban corridor. So I'm suggesting, let's make it 5. Let's not adhere to the 4. Let's make it 5 stories. I think if you went 3 and then 6, the building would look awkward and not look right. I think the scale of the building, the way it looks, you've got 3, you've got 4 and 6, you got 4, 5, 6, and I think visually it really works. It works well. It looks very good, but that can be shrunk down to 3, 4, 5, and I think that's far more appropriate for this street. I know in time, in 50, 60 years, that Queen Street could be totally different, but it will be 50, 60 years from now. It's not going to be tomorrow. So, we might find the street just grows, from this project down, and the buildings do get taller. That's a possibility, but that's how I feel about it. So, being a responsible councilman, I want to make a suggestion how you make your money back on this. I don't think your courtyard there is of much service. The pathway between Queen Street and the Logan Street project, you have a courtyard on this building. And I think people are just going to walk right past it, and they want to go down to the waterfront, to the plaza down there, I think that's the exciting part of this project. I think the plaza at the side of this building, I don't think it's that exciting. And and it has no street frontage, it's at the rear of the houses on Logan Street. I would see that being built out. And not be as prominent. It should be stepped back somewhat, but not a full courtyard there. I don't think that that's necessary, and that's my suggestion to you, that you can make up the units by shrinking that courtyard and building out that building at that point, if you follow what I'm saying, right? So you have more units there, so take it out on the front of the building and put those units in the courtyard area. That's what I would suggest, and I think that that's a good compromise. You know, nobody ever gets, well, maybe some people get everything they want in life, but life is about compromise and working with, committees like this, and also working with the people of the town, et cetera, so that we all get, it's about compromise, but in the end, we get what's good for the town, and that's what I'm after. So that's my talk there. And I do have some other questions, but that's my contribution when it comes to the bulk and scale of this building on Queen Street. So.
Can I just respond just for just that by getting rid of the courtyard, it's never quite as easy as it sounds on paper to push and pull the building. We're already at a width of around 20 meters, which means the units are starting to get deep as it is. So, and by moving the builder closer to those backyards, it means, potentially more shading, loss of some of that green space. Yeah, so it's when we're designing it, there's teams that are looking at this sort of thing. So just to say that that might be challenging to do that.
And I just wanted to add too that part of the appeal for me when I reviewed the application was the amenity space at grade. And I thought that the courtyard, while it doesn't have any retail space fronting it, would still be an active thoroughfare as far as providing access to the Stanfield site further down towards the river. But I do like the idea of having, rather than a long corridor, that it has an open space in the middle of it, so that you don't end up with this like what you're proposing would actually be probably less inviting. It would be a long corridor as opposed to having potentially an open space where people could congregate and raise some greenery and things like that. It would make it feel a little bit more active. So I'm actually quite in favor of keeping the open space, the courtyard. I think it's a lovely component to that particular portion of the development. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
How many stories is the newer building on the other side of Logan Street?
4 stories.
All right. And the county building, how many stories is it?
It's probably effectively 4 stories. I don't know what, it's got large
But it
floor-
has the roof.
Yeah, it has the
slope.
large roof and has
So-
that corner feature as well, so it's
So
probably...
it's quite high.
Yeah.
All right. The old Cassidy house that used to sit on this site was 3 stories. So we're talking about 10 feet. Anyway, just an observation.
Deputy Mayor Hinton.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thomas is a great councillor. He always does his homework, so it keeps me on my toes. I do kind of want to say that the height, I've heard from a lot of people, because that building is in Ward 3 that I represent, and Councillor McGrath represents. I was hoping at some point maybe the height there, if we could allocate it to moving some of the units, so not to lose any space, but to reallocate the height, because that is concerning. Is it going to stick out like a sore thumb? And and I will say thank you, because we are not a city, we are a town, and we have to grow, but we want to keep that uniqueness that keeps us Truro. That's why we live here. If people want to live in the city, move to the city. So I want to make sure that it looks, I just want the best, safest development for the residents that are going to live in that unit, or the development, and the surrounding residents that have already lived there, right? I don't want any issues. So I want to make sure everything's crossed and dotted. This can be very exciting, but things have to be in place. The height is a little bit of a concern for me as well, because I do think it is large. It's large. And so I want the frontage to look good, but I wanted to address that. This is a town. It's a lot of change coming forward if this is approved. So I do echo Councillor Thomas's, and he doesn't say anything unless he's thought it out. So, and I appreciate his input always. So I just wanted to echo that. I do have the same concern.
I just wanted to, Sarah Bell, see if you had anything just from the downtown Truro perspective.
Yeah, I was actually just going to press my, my mic on this. I am not opposed to the 6-story height that you are proposing. It makes sense once you explain on visually how it will look like. To be fair with you, I feel like the economic impact that this will bring for the downtown will be significant. I was a little bit confused on what Councillor Graham and then what Councillor Thomas were talking about, and their recommendation that Mr. Fox has done. But I think I understand now that it is only the setback that he was recommending, right? We are still, your recommendation was to keep the 6-story, and it was just the setback, which is what you presented on tonight. On the new designs that you presented was the setback that you took in consideration, correct?
Yes, well, I won't speak for Jason, but the setback of the building had been pushed back. The step back has remained the same, 4.5 meters, I believe it is. I think what's the discussion is whether it's a 3-story street wall or a 4- and 5-story street wall piece. Yep.
So as I do understand both Councillor Deputy Mayor Hinton and Councillor Tillman's concerns about the height. However, I feel that where it is located, we are not necessarily impacting as much as whether it will be in the Heritage District. So I think it is in my personal opinion, that the 6-story and the setback that was presented tonight will look good. I mean, he said it looks good on paper. It is another thing when it starts. I do feel that this development will bring housing, will bring business, and it will just make our downtown more vibrant and alive. And at the end of the day, we want to develop and we want to grow. And we don't, like we said before, we don't want to be a passing town. We want to be the destination. We want to be the town. And I feel like this will attract more.
Thank you, Sarah Bell. Any other comments specific to what we've been discussing or anything that we haven't touched on yet that you have questions or comments about? Councillor Thomas?
I'd like to talk about parking. You know, the Queen Street project meets all requirements for parking. In fact, it exceeds them for the urban corridor. It only has to be 0.75 units and for a 2-bedroom unit. And, you know, it's difficult to look at this because you haven't cited how many one-bedroom units, how many 2 bedrooms, how many 3 bedrooms. So what we have to do is just take an average of, let's say, 2-bedroom, that they're all 2-bedroom units. And so that's what I did. And so I just want to look at the Logan Street project and take a look at how it's going to be developed and also take a look at the site plan. Because on the site plan, and maybe we could reference that on the screen, because I don't know if I see it clearly on this one here, but see it on the screen. This is for, yeah, it'll show the number of parking spots, et cetera. You know, and the progression of the development from ABC, I think back 1, back 2. Yeah, where we see ABC is the first part of the development, and then you're going to go to G, I believe, and then the DEF or something like that. Is that correct? You might have it. You might have it. You have a site plan. Yeah, right there. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. So let's take a look. In phase 1, there's 107 units and 85 parking spaces, and that works out to approximately, I have to find it here, but approximately, I worked that all out. I can't find it now. But it works out to probably about, well, whatever that is, 85 divided by 107, right? So 85 divided by 107 is 79.79 spaces per unit. And so, that's fine. So phase 1 is fine. But then we look at phase 2, and all of a sudden we're looking at, phase 2. Phase 2 is fine, phase 2A and phase 2B, because we already talked about that. That's the Queen Street project. But when we look at phase 3, all of a sudden we have 224 units and just 93 parking spaces. And so that falls even below 0.5. It's like 0.44 parking spaces. Now, this is an issue. And not only that, but there's 50,000 square feet of retail space or commercial space. And so I looked up online, what's the average in Canada for retail space in Canada? And it's about 2,100 square feet. So then if you take a look at our requirements for parking, and that's about, so much per one, it ends up that, I wrote this down, you need quite a few parking spaces. You need something like, for the retail parking, 265 parking spaces. If it was all put, the commercial place was all put into 2,100 square feet of stores, you need 265. As the town planner said, right now, just for the 331 units, you need 249 at 0.75, and we've got 241, so we're short 8. But that doesn't include the commercial space, right? So that's one issue. But the other issue is I don't see where that, if you had 93 to 85, I don't see where you get that, Mr. Fox, I don't see where you get that 241 from. It doesn't add up unless you're using some of the parking spaces that will be involved with, the new Stanfield's commercial building. They don't add up. And so this afternoon, I just couldn't put it together.
It's okay if I just speak just for a second about parking?
Because I got, just one second, I got 178 according to your figure. So if we just look at what you mentioned on this site plan, you add that all up for the Logan Street project, you got 178 according to figure 5. And yet we're reporting 241, so we're short there. And then there's no parking for the commercial place. So my point is this, when you get to phase 3, then phase 3 doesn't work unless you're going to be putting in the new factory floor and using that area there for parking, because you're going to be so short of parking at that point. To me, it doesn't look like it works. But so you need to explain that to me.
I'm actually not sure I followed what I need to explain to you. My apologies. I really lost some of your math there.
Okay.
What I will say, though, is that this whole development is definitely within a walkable area of the core. It was never included in the downtown core because it was a factory. So it was always set aside as a downtown. It was in a different zone of the regional service. Now that it is very much part of the downtown core, if this proposal goes to fruition, what we'll see is an extension of our downtown, the downtown walkable core. You are going to see the same, you should see the same demand for vehicles that we just anticipated when we dealt with parking requirements for our downtown core zone. So I think it's totally appropriate to apply either the urban corridor standard or the downtown corridor standard, downtown core or urban corridor standard parking requirements for this development, because it's within a 1 kilometer radius of a grocery store and English Place.
Yeah,
it is within 2 kilometers of 2 grocery stores. It is a very walkable development and should have the downtown parking requirements applied. And if you go through the math on that, you do end up with somewhere around nine spaces short.
Yeah, eight spaces short,
Yeah.
241 you said.
So I think
When-
I'm not sure about, I'm not really, I'm not going to be able to defend my math on the fly here, but,
Okay.
but I will say that I believe that the parking that's proposed is appropriate for this development because of its location and because it is so walkable.
Okay, I don't disagree with the .75, being the downtown standard. I agree with that. It should be 1.5, but we said, okay, it can be .75. I'm not disputing that. I agree with that. I'll concede that. It's just that when you add the parking spaces at the site plan, they don't add up to 241. And where we need 249 just for the residential units, because it's 331 units times .75 is 249 parking spaces required at .75 per unit for the residential, for the apartments or the units. And so that is eight short. But that doesn't speak to the retail space. And so that's an issue.
Yeah,
But not
there's-
only that, Mr. Fox.
Sorry, I just want to add, there is no parking requirement for retail in the downtown core. That's why.
Right. Well, I think as far as a working project, because there's streets downtown, there is one street down here going to be called Stanfield Street, but I'm just concerned about it. I'm raising it as a concern, and so it's a concern that I have. And the other thing is when you look at the site map and you add up the parking spaces that are mentioned as the underground parking spaces, they add up to 178 according to Figure 5, not to 241. If you could either do it now or when tomorrow, just take a look and add those up and see if you get to 241. I don't see it, and I'll call you tomorrow and we can go through it, Mr. Fox, and just see if we can come up with the 241. And maybe you could show
Shall
me where
we
the
ask the
241 is.
applicant what the applicant feels the parking spaces are for residential units?
Yeah, so what Matt's telling me is the 437 number is the underground parking spaces only, so the on-street and the surface parking lot is in addition to that. There's roughly a couple of hundred extra spaces on top of that. I would say that, and I'm sure Jason can follow up on this, many municipalities, Charlottetown, HRM, Wolfville, Lunenburg, they're all getting out of the parking game, the parking requirements, in favor of kind of more open standards, not using antiquated standards that were developed in the 1940s. That's what a lot of zoning bylaws have. It sounds like you guys have been fairly progressive in reducing them down. The more progressive thing to do at some point in the future is just get out of the parking game altogether and leave it up to developers to figure out who they're marketing to.
So just to bring us back to Councillor Thomas's point, the exterior parking, which we can see from this image that's on the screen here, would include some exterior parking for residents. That would be the intention.
Yes, so some of it. Oh, sorry. So yeah, we haven't talked about the affordability piece, but typically when we get to the next stage of the project and we're chatting with CMHC about affordable, usually the surface parking is much cheaper, like to pay for an indoor space. They're about $40,000 per indoor space to build them today. A surface parking space is about $4,000 in comparison, so about 10 times the cost difference. So if we do get into affordability, the ability to have some surface parking for the units that are more affordable units is usually what you strive for. So I think, and we can regroup with Jason tomorrow on the overall parking counts. I think the 437 represents the indoor parking, but there's an additional couple of hundred spaces that are surface. But we agree, Bill, we should kind of regroup tomorrow and just confirm the numbers.
Yeah. Yes, I'd like that to take place if possible, because what you're adding in is G, and I'm not perhaps opposed to adding in G, so what happens is some people from C, D, and E might park in building G in the underground because there's an excessive amount of parking there. But as a standalone project, when we look at it and we're asked to review it as a standalone project, the Logan Street project, it has insufficient parking, but maybe not if you include the excess, really, of parking of building G. So it, becomes a little confusing as a presentation and to know exactly, where the parking's coming from. So when it's presented to council, I think it could be cleaned up as a presentation, exactly where the parking's coming from and the total parking on both sites, Queen Street, Logan Street, and how and how a person living in building D or C will access parking, right? And what their options are. I think it's needed. And then, when you finally get down to building, F or whatever, or H, then there's going to be some surface parking, et cetera. But what I'd also like some explanation to is, because of the project goes in phases, I want to make sure there's sufficient parking as you move from phase to phase, because these phases are stretched out in months, not even months, but years. And so, if it's 2 or 3 years between, the completion of one project and the start of another, there needs to be sufficient parking for that first phase, for phase one, for when 2 starts, for phase 1 and 2, and then finally for them all. Do you follow what I'm saying? And I think if it was presented that way, it would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think point well taken. We'll certainly look at There we go. We'll look at clarifying that for the council presentation. And, from our perspective, it is one overall development. I know we're forced to follow 2 different streams because they're in 2 different zones, so it's a little confusing tonight how this all goes together, but it will be. And from the developer's perspective, he's not going to be able to sell units if there's not the required parking that people are looking for. So it'll be incumbent on him to make sure that those parkings are there so he can sell the units.
So, Madam Chair, I have a couple of other questions. Can I continue? This is not to do with parking now. I've finished with parking. Okay.
I just want to follow up on that, and obviously there's more discussion merited, so I'll let that happen tomorrow. I'm not going to speak on the commercial space, but one thing I did say previously about this development, and I brought it up, that's why, to alleviate some parking areas, I did bring up both the car share, and I'm really hoping that that's going to happen. For a lot of reasons, because for people that aren't using a car as much, can't afford a car, to get on the car share, that will certainly alleviate a lot of things. I think we have to move forward on that, so I hope that is going to be implemented if this is approved, and because I think that's a real good way to alleviate some of these situations as far as parking goes. As far as the commercial parking, he says he's calling Mr. Fox tomorrow. Trust me, he will. And there can be a further discussion on that, so I think that's a good thing.
Madam Chair, can I ask
Sure. I was just going to, I know, Councillor Thomas, you want to move on from parking, but just before we do, I just want to make sure Councillor Graham doesn't have something on the same topic.
I do.
Okay. Go ahead.
I applaud Halifax and Charlottetown for their non-parking restrictions, and I hope that one day Truro gets there. But to imply that our parking policy might be a bit antiquated is a bit unfair when you consider we don't have public transportation at this time, although it is a priority of this council. Until we have public transportation, we can't alleviate our parking requirements.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to suggest that it wasn't. I'm just saying some municipalities still have very outdated standards. It sounds like yours is much more progressive than other communities.
Councillor Thomas, and the
Yes,
next
I'd just like to move on to the Truro River Walk. And I just wasn't quite clear in the presentations as it's quite clear as far as it going east. In other words, it's going to, go to Riverside Park. But going west, it sort of disappears off the map. And I'm just wondering Could you tell me how far this project's going to take that Riverwalk and where the town takes over, or will the town take over and develop as it goes further west, or what's the plan there? Is there a plan yet for that Riverwalk?
There is no plan at this point, other than right now, I think the proposal just shows it extending to the edge of the property, which would be just off the screen. From my perspective, I would love to see the town work with regional partners to develop a system that runs all along the dike all the way out to the discovery site.
Yeah, because I think it, as a dead end, it doesn't really work. I think it's got to go through to the soccer field and, right, at the Tim Field, at least to there, right? And so I think that's got to be, some thought's got to be put into that by the town, not by the developer, but working with you. And I think the town has to do some thinking about that. Landscape design, I think it's an important part of this project for both the whole project. The whole project kind of hinges for me on the beautification of that project, its walkability, and just its attractiveness. And landscaping is a big part of that. And so I'd like to see at some point before it comes to council that there is a landscape plan, that's written into the agreement, Mr. Fox, a landscape plan, not just a stormwater management plan, but also a landscape plan, because I think it's so an integral part of this whole project, and so I'd like to see it defined.
Councillor Thomas, can you just clarify, because I think the applicant has brought up the tree.
Yeah, that's right. I was really happy to see that, but and that's very good. There it is there. It wasn't in our package, but that tree schedule is great. But it involves more than just trees, right? I'd like to see there's going to be some shrubbery and some green areas and how those will be handled, et cetera. You must have a plan for that eventually, and I think that should be a part of the development agreement. Yeah, I'll turn mine off.
Yeah, so, the project has and will continue to be fully designed by landscape architects. We're one of the largest in Atlantic Canada. The challenge, though, with putting a detailed plan in a development agreement is that as we move through this project, things will naturally change. And if it's firmed up totally in a plan and the DA relies on a landscape plan, it means that if we change, say, one of the plazas moves over to a different location, then we're back in front of PAC and council for DA amendments. So at this stage, we would prefer to keep it relatively general. The landscape, we can certainly commit to the planting of the trees that are shown on this plan, but to get in much more detail could really compromise the developer as the project starts to roll out.
Okay, I accept that. In regards to energy now, net zero, the town would like to go towards net zero, and I think the whole country is going towards net zero, and we're going to see building standards change, I think in this province, we're working off of the building code of 2020, I believe it is. And we haven't even adopted that fully, right? And then there's a new one's coming out nationally for 2024. I'm not an architect. I don't know all about these things, but I do know that the province hasn't even adapted 2020. And these are going to become much more stringent when it comes to energy. So I'm just wondering where your building is at in regards to code and energy use, and also energy production. Would you ever consider solar cells on the roof or anything like that to come to net zero? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, we certainly have to meet the most current and just recently released building code, but the plans are showing solar panels on the roof. It's a tough time for solar. We're starting to transition from an old technology to perovskites and these new solar that are said to offer up to 10 times more solar return than the current ones. So it will depend on when things roll out. My understanding is these new solar technologies should be on the market really in the next 3 to 5 years, and then you get a much better return on your investment.
So it might be worth waiting until
Yeah,
the new
well,
ones are on market.
it could be that, you know, phase 1 doesn't have it, but phase 2 and phase 2B and those ones all do have it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. Thank you very much.
The biggest savings, of course, is just retaining these old buildings. It means
Right.
we're not having to tear down and bring in all kinds of new material. That's the biggest energy savings for retrofitted buildings like this.
So when it comes to retrofitting, you know, the ceiling heights in some of those, you know, factory floors, I don't know what they are, but I've sort of peered in.
12 feet and
They're 12 feet?
Yeah, they're
Will
quite
they-
high.
Will they remain 12 feet in
Yep.
the apartments?
Yep. For the old buildings, it wouldn't make sense to take down the floors and just to get a couple of extra feet. So the existing buildings, that's Building B, Building E, the existing floor-to-floor heights will remain. The new floors that go on Building E and Building B will probably be closer to 10-foot floor-to-floor
Okay.
heights. Yep.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Graham?
Could we go back to slide 20 on the Logan Street development? And it's the same question that I asked with regard to the Queen Street development, just for your feedback on the comments that our planner identified. Oh, I wrote it down as slide 20, but maybe I was mistaken.
Which presentation?
Logan Street? Maybe the next one. It was concerns that you had identified. Which slide was that, did I? Is it these two? Okay, yeah. And maybe we've answered a lot of this. Let me just, did you want to comment on these concerns?
Yeah, sure. I think they're valid kind of policy things. There's always an issue of building height, you know, where you tend to get the tallest new buildings tend to be on waterfronts and riverfronts. That's kind of where cities evolved. And in order to take down buildings and industrial uses that used to occupy, kind of a rule of thumb that developers use is you need to get, like if you've got a 3-story building, you're not going to tear it down to build a 4-story building. It's usually double the height, so that's as a rule of thumb. So the building height here, I think Jason mentioned, we're set back from residential uses. The shadows really don't impact anything surrounding it. That the height of 11 stories for that one building is quite compatible. The land use compatibility, we're shifting from an industrial use to a mixed use, which with retail and very specialized forms of commercial. There could even be some, I would hope in the DA, there's opportunity for office type uses in there, potentially a small hotel and residential. So there's all these, a most highly mixed use type development. If you imagine Queen's Mark landed in Truro, that's probably close to what this development would be. Parking, you know, using that entire ground floor, which is in the floodplain for the parking, is the highest and best use, and then everything happens above it. Stormwater management plan, again, we've said that most of the site is already asphalt and roofs, and we're introducing a lot of landscape features, so we should be able to reduce the stormwater impacts. Traffic statement, we're fine by our traffic engineer, and flood mitigation is what Rob's going to be tasked with. Yeah. Yep.
And I think there were a couple more on the next slide. I think.
So
Oh.
these weren't concerns, these were...
Okay.
That it aligns well, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Yep.
I think now I'll just take a moment to see if there is anyone sitting in the gallery that wishes to say anything. Great. Oh, you would? Okay. Would you mind, Rob, just giving up the mic for a second there? Thank you.
I'd just like to interject just for a second while she's gearing up with the mic. This committee debated parking when we had an 11-story building which had no on-site parking. It was no on the street parking, and just had several parking spaces below. So now we're looking at this project and nitpicking the parking, and we've got over 500 units, and you're talking about 8 spaces. That seems like, you know, come on, give your head a shake. I mean, which direction are we going here in the town? And I know we like to maintain a small town atmosphere, but unfortunately, the town is growing, and we're going to have to start to act like we're a little bit larger than a little town. So just my comments, a couple issues. I know some councilors that sit on this committee voted for that 11-story building, which had virtually no parking, and we at length debated the parking issue in the downtown core years ago. So anyway.
Just in response to that, any concerns that I expressed had nothing to do with the parking ratio. It had to do with two things. First of all, it had to do with the fact that the commercial space, there's 50,000 square feet of commercial space on the Logan site, and another 4,100 square feet of commercial space on the Queen Street site. Now, the Queen Street site, the 4,100 commercial space, there's no problems with parking for commercial space. But down for the Logan one, there's 50,000 square feet, which with zero parking. Mr. Fox said that if we consider it as a downtown property rather than as an urban development property, that we don't have to consider commercial. But this is not downtown. We can consider it as downtown, but it is not downtown. It doesn't have a myriad of streets surrounding the project. And so my concern is what about the commercial space? And I think it's a not having any parking. So that is the real concern. And then the other concern is, as the project is developed in phases, to ensure that there's sufficient parking for the residences as it goes through the phases. And I think both of those are reasonable concerns.
I don't know much about parking, certainly not as much as many of you here. But I guess I just wonder if a lot of the exterior parking is used by residents who possibly may not be at their residences during the day because they have jobs. Is it possible that those spots could serve both purposes, that they would possibly be vacant during the day and could be used for shoppers? I don't know. I mean, I guess it would come down to whether they were reserved or anything like that, but...
We discussed that last time, but I would like to see that in the report to address that concern, that is how it will be addressed. Thank you.
Fair enough. And my recollection, Councillor Thomas, wasn't that we discussed that specifically, but I think we discussed sort of the inverse, which was the parking for the factory and whether that could possibly be later day residential parking. So this would almost be the converse of that, but same sort of idea. Okay. Welcome. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and turning on the mic, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Closer? All right. My name is Deborah Smith. I'm in Ward 3. Do you need more than that? All right. So I have presented here before with regards to the issue I'm going to talk to you about, and I've attended a number of other meetings in the last year with regards to the community plan. And tonight, my big issue, and I did attend one of the open houses, is the floodplain. And, you know, I've heard this council talk regularly about issues around safety and risk and all of those things. And so that's the focus of my comments tonight. So I have some questions. but I also would like to give you some brief comments for context, since my memory's not so great anymore. And so I wrote it down, and I'd like to read, if it's okay, what I've brought. It shouldn't take that long. What I feel is being lost here is the risk to current homes in the floodplain. And this is what the CBCL study of 2017 talks about. The study states no residential development in the floodplain. As a point of clarification to comments made by a councillor at the September 9th meeting, it was stated that misinformation was given to Truro residents about development on the floodplain. And I did want to say I gave myself the CBC 2017 study to a number of individuals. And I'm not sure if that's what he was talking about, but I wanted to clarify that. I have talked to a number of people and given them this study. They could read what was recommended in the study and then compare it to what the council is doing. It's clear, in my opinion, that property values will be impacted by not following the 2017 study. Without flood insurance or the ability to get a mortgage to sell or repair, what value does your home have? That risk increases with development on the floodplain. And this is talked about in the CBCL study. If you step in a puddle, the water goes somewhere. The 1997 EDM study, which is what is being used for the approach to the projects, states it is not morally defensible to expose the public to excess levels of risk. The 2017 study, and instead of giving the names, I'm just going to give the years because it's the 1997 study and the 2017. So there is that 20-year gap. And the 2017 study now is roughly 7 years old, which is not very old. It was a groundbreaking study, an award-winning study that was put in place because of the 2012 flooding. And the province decided that this flooding here in Truro was so serious that it needed to do something more. And from that flowed the CBCL study, and then it came out in 2017. So I think it's a very important study that should be looked at. The 2017 study states it is recommended to prohibit all residential development on the floodplain. Only a limited amount of commercial development on Roby Street is permitted with clear guidelines and limitations, and this is to protect current residents. The 2017 study states there are a number of approaches the council can take to protect current residents on the floodplain. The most important is to inform homeowners. The decision which you have taken is the do-nothing approach, and it's quoted, the do-nothing approach, in the CBCL study. The do-nothing approach, and in the 2017 study states, it is because the town does not endure, and this is quote, endure costs, so the town does not have to endure the costs for flood damage. The homeowners, the citizens do. So the approach that council is taking to use the CBC study for just the mapping and to use the 1997 study approach to permit building makes no rational sense at all to me if you're concerned about the safety and the risk to the current homes in the floodplain. 7 years ago, the floodplain in Truro increased by 193.31 hectares, or 478 acres. This is in the CBCL study. I translated it to acres to make it a little bit easier to understand, but the floodplain increased by this amount. Through the mapping work through the mapping work in the 2017 study and as adopted in the community plan, 541 additional homes are now in the floodplain, and no one is telling the homeowners. They are unaware of this. The council is protecting itself by having building permit applicants sign a release and not hold the town, or in my opinion, the council responsible for damages in the event of a flood. This is for the floodplain. Who's protecting the residents? Why are you doing this? It makes no rational sense to me at all if you care about the residents that are currently your constituents and their homes. Will the council clearly show what part of these developments are in the 1 in 20 and the 1 in 100 floodplain? Back in the last few months, somehow the maps changed. The map that I paid and had it printed off, had dots that showed where the 1 in 20 floodplain was, and hatching for where the 1 in 100 floodplain was. The maps now show just these lines of a very pale blue and a slightly darker blue, almost impossible to understand. I can't figure out why these changes would be made. So I cannot be clear, I cannot understand, and I would suggest most of your constituents, most of the homeowners, cannot figure out, arguably, where the 1 in 100 and where the 1 in 20 floodplain designations are for each of these projects. And so I think for the one here tonight, there should be a clear explanation. Project A or Building A, this much of it is in the 1 in 20, this much of it is in the 1 in 100, or it's not there at all. But that should be clearly explained. Why did the council not tell homeowners about the findings of the 2017 study 7 years ago? When I read in the community plan about the CBCL study, I went looking for it. It's referenced in our community plan. I couldn't find it. Is it buried? Is it in a drawer? Other than using it for the mappings, it took a lot of work to find it. And when I did, I was shocked because that study is talking about protecting us, about making sure our homes are safe, making sure our workplaces, when we go there, there's restrictions in there that I don't think are being applied at all on these floodplain developments. Why did the council not follow the recommendations on the floodplain that could have given homeowners a chance to protect their homes when costs were so much cheaper in 2017? Window wells, diverting water from your eave trough, foundation protections. These are just a few of the things that 7 years ago, if residents had been made aware, as recommended by the CBCL study, they could have taken these precautions. Today, these costs have probably gone up. I would be guessing, but I'm going to say 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 times, let alone finding someone to do the work. So why? That's my question to council. Last year,
Ms.
both
Smith,
the Insurance Bureau of
sorry to
Canada-
interrupt you, but I just want to make clear, this committee is not council.
I understand that, but
Okay.
there are some councilors
Okay,
here.
can I just ask sort of where you are in your presentation?
I only have a little bit here, one more page, so I'd say 5 minutes at the very most.
Okay, thank you.
Last year, both the Insurance Bureau of Canada and some of the banks stated they will not insure flooding in homes or provide mortgages in flood-prone and flood-risk areas in Nova Scotia. All you have to do is put in Insurance Bureau of Canada and flooding insurance for Nova Scotia, and it'll pop up for you. Can anyone on council or here state that property devaluation will not happen with these additional risks from not using the most recent approaches to the 2017 floodplain study? Why are you allowing residential development on the floodplain when the 2017 study shows the risks to personal safety, and this is in that study, the risks to personal safety and private property have increased, and development increases this risk for current homeowners? Is council using the maps in the 2017 study that include climate change? It's the recommended maps to be used, I don't know, that added 478 acres to the floodplain and increased risk to at least an additional 541 homes, maybe more, because of these developments that are going through. Previously, there were approximately 500 homes that were in the floodplain, so they've more than doubled. And people do not know this. They haven't, the council, the town has not informed them. Why is council using the do-nothing approach, which is the 1997 study, instead of following the newest recommendations for homeowners so that they may not have to endure costs from flooding? The 2017 study speaks of the necessity for stormwater management protection and water protection for current homeowners on the floodplain, and enhanced protection if there was commercial development, because residential development is not permitted. So in a limited area, commercial development. But this hasn't happened, and in this project here, there's talk about perhaps not needing stormwater management because there's some open areas, there's some grassy areas. This, again, makes no sense to me. The 2017 study cites many risks to current homeowners with 40 recommendations. Many are too costly, no question about that. But what about the recommendations to mitigate those risks? I can't go through them all tonight. Timing, there isn't the time. But why is council not addressing this mitigation aspect? Why is council not looking at the impact to the current residents, to their homes, their property? This is only a few of my concerns I brought here tonight. Please, I ask you to question and then give answers why you, as our elected representatives, are not going with the most recent scientific data on the floodplain and using instead an approach from a 27-year-old study that states, and I'm going to repeat it again, it is not morally defensible to expose the public to excess levels of risk. This project, if I understand it correctly, is being pushed fast-tracked because it's not wanted to go, how can I phrase that? It's hoped not to go before perhaps a different council. I don't understand why a project of this magnitude should be rushed. All the time that is necessary, and I heard, I think earlier, and I found some of the comments hard to hear, so I will agree the system doesn't work well. And so I didn't get all of the flood mitigation issues that were raised here. But that this is a long-term project. Take the time to know that this project is not going to have the kinds of impacts that are anticipated and cautioned against in the CBCL 2017 study. Last comment. If you look at the community plan and if you look at the CBCL study, it talks about what happened just 12 years ago that ended up promoting the CBCL study being put in place or being developed. And in my opinion, to not use that, and if you go to the plan and if you go to the study, you will see the Stanfield project under the water overflowing. The park that's just a little distance away, completely flooded out. The banks completely overrun. That's just 12 years ago. And the CBCL study talks about floodplains now in the 1 in 2, the 1 in 5, and the 1 in 10 time frame. Back a few months ago, I heard one of the town staff speak to the fact, and this is supported in CBCL study, that this 1 in 20 and 1 in 100 floodplain area, that's all gone. Climate change has changed that.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And just a reminder, there is the public hearing which does take place before council for this project, so this committee will not be making the final decision, so that is on October 7th at 6 p.m.
So that there is an opportunity for...
There is, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone wish to address the floodplain or stormwater management issue any more this evening? Or do people feel as though we've... Anything more from anyone?
Well, I guess the question's obvious. I'm going to ask it. Are we using the 2017 study or the 1997 study?
We're using the 2017 study for all of our data and all of the mapping. It's all from the 2017 study. It's just the cut and fill process was developed a lot earlier than that, and that's what we're using. So we're using both. In 2017 is all the mapping, and that was all done in public information sessions, and council has adopted all of the recommendations of the plan. We've been doing all of the immediate and short-term recommendations. Council's been doing that.
Okay, are we at a stage where we can put together a motion, is the question. I've made some notes. I know that we've discussed the street wall, which I'm going to choose to call it the street wall as opposed to setback and step back, which is a little too hard to clarify in the microphone, I think. So we've discussed the height of the street wall and the recommendation of council, or of Planner Fox, and the applicant's rebuttal or comments on that. We have discussed parking, and I know that certainly will be a live issue for Councillor Thomas going forward, and we've discussed making the application dependent or contingent on having the addendum of the tree schedule. And there may be other things that I haven't picked up on or haven't written down, so if anyone else has any suggestions for the motion, or if anyone would like to carve out a motion, I'm all ears.
I just wanted to say that this is a recommendation, and all these comments and questions and further discussion will all be brought forth at the October 7th meeting for anybody that's watching and doesn't realize how we'll have further questions at that meeting. Yeah, okay.
So as you know, just a reminder, this committee does have the obligation of providing something for council to consider at that meeting. So whether we are willing to make a recommendation is sort of our next step, and whether that recommendation has any conditions, whether those are the ones provided by planning staff, or whether this committee wishes to add other conditions to those recommendations. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Taylor.
When is the council meeting?
It's the October 7th at 6 p.m. meeting. That's what we're discussing.
October 7th?
That's when council will make the decision
We'll
based.
meet on this proposal.
Correct, yes. So that is the date when council will make a decision on this proposal.
So the applicant has between now and October 7th to address the concerns?
I would suggest so, yes.
Okay. Doesn't seem like a long time. Can I make a motion?
Yes.
Okay, well, I
Oh,
move
sorry,
that-
one second there, Don, sorry. I think Councillor Graham had her, unless you want to just have it in the discussion portion, but did you have something you wanted to clarify before the motion was put on the table?
Well, it is my suggestion that the recommendation made by council, when we look at it, we remove the first, regarding the Queen Street application, we remove the first recommendation, the first condition.
The wall, the street wall.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Taylor, would you like to make a motion?
Are we voting on both at the same time, or are we breaking them down?
They are two separate motions, so, I mean, they can be the same, that the committee,
Well,
you know-
I prefer to lump them together, but I'll, whatever the chair suggests.
I think they're going to be two, but but you can certainly make them straightforward if that's your wish.
I move we accept the planner's recommendation on Queen Street.
So Councillor Graham has suggested that the first condition, being that the facade of 3 stories, or that the street wall, the facade be lowered to 3 as opposed to 4 and 5 for the street wall. So Councillor Graham has asked that that be removed. Are you suggesting that that condition should stay in, that the planner has provided?
I don't accept that condition.
So you're okay with that condition being removed, the same as Councillor Graham? Do you understand what I'm saying, Don?
Can I suggest that if you want to change the motion, that this motion should be presented before the committee here, and if it fails based on the fact that we don't agree that it'll be a 3-story, then another motion can come forward, and then that motion can be. But right now, we have a motion before us recommended by the town planner. Bear in mind what the town planner said when you make your vote, but it should be put before the committee as to whether we accept it or not. And then a new motion could be put forward following that. That's what I would suggest to the chair.
Thanks, Councillor Thomas. I agree with that. So, Don, you have put forward a motion on the Queen Street project, that it is approved with the conditions provided by Planner Fox.
Correct.
It's on their screens right now.
Oh, as on the screen. Okay. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Okay. Seconded by Ms. Delorier. You're withdrawing your seconding of that, okay? Is there a seconder? Okay, Councillor Thomas? So just to clarify for all the members of the committee, Don has put forward a motion that the recommendation of the planner with the 2 conditions as listed and as shown on the screen are put forward to the committee. So no changes to what was provided in our report, staff report.
I wanted, aside from the motion, I just wanted, did you have any comments following the presentation about the floods? Did you want to make anything after that presentation about the flooding? Do you have anything to say, or?
No, I could certainly comment on, because it sounds like there's confusion about what that number 1 means, so I just want to be sure everybody's clear on had suggested versus what our plan had suggested.
I'm sure that'll come up at the October 7th, the issues that were addressed here, because, you know, we'll be getting calls, so it's important we deal with that.
CAO, Mr. Dolder?
Yeah, I just would caution TPAC in taking the statement was just made by the resident as being fact. Again, I think there's a lot of things that were portrayed there that are inaccurate as far as both which study we are following and what the 2017 study actually told us to do, because in fact, we are following the recommendations, and the cut and fill methods that we're using for development, in fact, is consistent with that approach. And again, stormwater management is included with every one of our developments. So again, council has followed the direction of 2017, and I think the points that were presented are not clear. Again, engineering has been following this very closely. So again, if, you know, we can talk about this at the hearing if that's a requirement, but again, the fact that this current development has a stormwater engineer working on that process is a clear indication that of what the town's holding development to and taking the 2017 study very seriously. So again, you know, the facts that were laid or the statements that were made are a little bit of a misrepresentation of what the town is actually doing. So I wouldn't take those statements verbatim for sure. It's not accurate. So again, that's something that, you know, council as well can consider. And I know council went through this debate extensively, and in fact, the public was informed, and Mr. McKinnon did indicate on what the results of the study were, and the study was available, and our mapping was clearly put on the site as well too, so people understood where they were. So just need that to be understood.
That's why I just said you might want to just address it and say, just state it all out. As we've said before, I brought that up earlier, flooding and stormwater management is very important. So I think, you know, you might want to address it. This is all going to come out at the hearing anyway, on October 7th. Okay.
Madam Chair, can I just make sure that the developers seem to be concerned that the committee is not aware of what it's voting on? And so I'd just like to reiterate what I suggested, is that we vote on this motion, and this motion is according to what Mr. Fox has presented before the meeting, and he would like to see, he was suggesting here that we have a 3-story front to the building, then set back. He doesn't describe how many stories after that, but in his writings, he's just talking about 4 or 5 or so. This is what we'll vote on. If the committee turns it down, then it can be rewritten to state what the developer is asking for, and that's a 4-story, 5-story street wall set back 4.5 to 6 stories. That's what he's proposed, and that would be a different motion than what we're voting on, just so the committee is completely clear what it is doing.
Absolutely. So I'll say it one more time. What the motion is currently on the table, which was brought by Mr. Taylor and seconded by Councillor Thomas, is, as you'll see on the screen, I will note that it doesn't speak to setback because that was addressed previously by the developer, and what we are dealing with is step back or street wall. And so what has been provided in the conditions by Planner Fox is, and this is staying in the motion, is that the facade, the street wall is lowered to 3 stories, as opposed to what was provided by the applicant this evening, showing 4 stories with a half 5th story. So is everyone clear on what the motion is on the table? Okay, and we have a motion and we have it second, so if there is no further discussion, someone can call for the question, or if there is further discussion, please let me know.
I call for the question then.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion, which is for the Queen Street development with the conditions provided by Planner Fox, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. It would be appreciated. Okay. So 2, and all those opposed signify by raising your hand and saying nay. Okay, so 4 opposed, so that motion has been defeated. So we do not have a motion for the We'll stay on the Queen Street project for now if anyone else would like to put another motion on the floor. Councillor Graham?
The motion would be as stated by staff with the removal of the first condition.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? Sarah Bell, okay. So that motion is on the table if there is discussion.
Question?
All those in favor of the motion on the table, please raise your hand by signifying yay. All those opposed, please raise your hand signifying nay. Okay, so that was a 4-2 motion, which what? I do?
Oh, you're a nay on that one. You have to vote.
I do? Okay, so that motion from the committee has passed, so council will be provided with the recommendation from the committee, which is that the project be approved with the first condition removed. Now we will move on to the second project, 1 Logan and 9 Bayview. Do you mind? So the motion is on your screens that was provided by staff, that council approve an application by Stanfields to enter into a development agreement to permit a mixed-use development consisting of 331 dwelling units of office commercial space, subject to the following conditions: that any new structure must either meet the town's floodplain development requirements, or the applicant must submit a flood mitigation strategy prepared by a licensed professional engineer, and the second condition being that submission of a stormwater management plan and traffic impact statement that have been approved by the town engineer.
So moved.
Do I have a seconder? Okay, Councillor Graham. Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor of the motion on the table, please raise your hand to signify yes. All those opposed? Okay, that motion has passed. All right, well, I don't think there's any other business. Our next meeting will be October 28th. Thank you. And if I could have a motion to adjourn, please. Thank you, Councillor Tinton.